The smell of gasoline mixed with the scent of aged leather was suffocating. It was pitch black, a darkness so absolute that for a moment I forgot where I was. Then the panic set in. My hands scrabbled against the soft felt lining of the enclosed space, my fingernails catching on the fabric. I was curled into a fetal position, my knees pressed tight against my chest. The corset of my custom Vera Wang wedding gown, which had made me feel like a queen just an hour ago, was now a cage crushing my ribs. I could barely breathe. The car hit a bump and my head slammed against the hard wall of the trunk. I bit my lip to keep from screaming, tasting copper and expensive lipstick. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fractured memories of the last 5 minutes. It had been a perfect morning. The Georgia sun was shining and the birds were singing outside my father's estate. I was ready. I was happy. Then Mr. Cobb had appeared. Mr. Cobb, who had driven my father for 30 years and me for my entire life. He had never raised his voice, never stepped out of line. But 5 minutes ago his eyes were wide with a terror I had never seen before. He had grabbed my arm, his grip bruising, and practically dragged me to the garage. I tried to ask him what was wrong, but he just shook his head, sweat beading on his forehead. "Get in, Miss Jasmine, please. Just get in," he had whispered, his voice trembling. "Don't say a word. You need to see this." Before I could protest, he had shoved me into the trunk of my own Rolls-Royce Phantom and slammed the lid shut. Now I was rolling through the streets of Atlanta in the dark. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the blood pounding in my ears. Why was he doing this? Was it a kidnapping? Was Mr. Cobb in trouble? Or had he finally snapped? Tears pricked my eyes, hot and angry. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I was supposed to be walking down the aisle to Dante in 2 hours. Dante, the man who had healed my heart after my father passed away. Dante, who treated me like I was the only woman in the world. The thought of him waiting for me, wondering where I was, made my chest ache. I had to get out. I had to tell him. Suddenly, the smooth asphalt turned into crunching gravel. The car slowed down, the tires grinding against loose stones. We were off the main road. The car came to a halt, the engine cutting off into a silence that was even more terrifying than the noise. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I heard the driver's door open and close. Footsteps crunched on the gravel, walking away from the car. Then silence again. I shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position when I saw it. A thin sliver of light cutting through the darkness. Mr. Cobb hadn't latched the back seat completely. There was a tiny crack between the leather seats, just enough to see through into the cabin and out the windshield. I pressed my eye to the gap, desperate for any clue. The view was bleak. We weren't at the church. We were at the old industrial park on the edge of town, a place of rusted warehouses and overgrown weeds. It was a desolate wasteland that my father used to say was a bad investment. Standing there, leaning against the hood of the car, was a figure I recognized instantly. It was Dante. Relief washed over me for a split second, followed immediately by confusion. What was he doing here? He was supposed to be at the chapel getting ready with his groomsmen. And then I saw the smoke. A thick plume of gray smoke curled up from his fingers. He took a long drag from a cigarette, exhaling with a look of pure satisfaction. My stomach twisted. Dante had sworn to me on his mother's life that he had quit smoking 3 years ago. He said he did it for our future children. Yet there he was, smoking with the practiced ease of someone who had never stopped. "Took you long enough," Dante said. His voice didn't sound like the warm, loving baritone I knew. It was sharp, impatient, and cold. "Traffic was a nightmare. You know how the city gets on Saturdays?" Another voice replied. My blood ran cold. I knew that voice. It was soft, melodic, and undeniably Southern. It was Jessica, my future sister-in-law, the woman who had held my hand yesterday at the rehearsal dinner and told me she finally felt like she had a sister, the woman who was married to Dante's younger brother. Jessica walked into my line of sight. She wasn't wearing her bridesmaid dress yet. She was in a sharp blazer and jeans, looking more like she was going to a business meeting than a wedding. She stopped in front of Dante, but she didn't hug him. She didn't ask why he was there. She reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a thick blue folder. "Did you bring it?" Dante asked, tossing the cigarette butt onto the ground and crushing it with the heel of his polished dress shoe. "Of course I did," Jessica said, a smirk playing on her lips. "The conservatorship papers, drafted exactly how we discussed. The moment you two say 'I do,' you become her legal next of kin. With the medical file we've been building for the past 6 months, the judge will hand over control of her estate before the honeymoon is over." I froze. The word conservatorship echoed in my head like a gunshot. I had heard that word before in business meetings with my father discussing hostile takeovers. It meant total control. It meant taking away a person's rights to their own money, their own decisions, their own life. "God, I need this to be over," Dante groaned, running a hand through his hair. "I can't stand her voice anymore. Every time she talks about our legacy or honoring her father, I want to throw up. She's so pathetic, so desperate for someone to love her." Jessica laughed, a cruel tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, poor baby. Just a few more hours and you'll be the owner of a $50 million empire. You can put up with a little more whining for that kind of payout. Besides, the drugs are working right." "Like a charm," Dante sneered. "She's been complaining about headaches and dizziness for weeks. She thinks it's wedding stress. She has no idea I've been spiking her morning smoothies with those sedatives you got from your doctor friend. She's barely holding it together. One big public meltdown today, and the narrative is set." Poor Jasmine, the grief of losing her father finally broke her mind. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stop the scream that was clawing its way up my throat. My knees shook so hard I thought they would knock against the trunk lid. The headaches, the fog that had clouded my brain for the last month. The times I had forgotten simple things like where I left my keys or what I had ordered for dinner. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was losing my mind just like my grandmother had. But it wasn't me. It was them. It was him. The man I loved, the man I trusted with my life, had been poisoning me. "And what about my cut?" Jessica asked, stepping closer to him. The distance between them vanished. She placed a hand on his chest, her fingers toying with his tie. It was an intimate gesture, far too intimate for a sister-in-law. 20% just like we agreed," Dante said, his voice dropping an octave. He looked at her with a hunger he had never shown me. "You'll get your money, Jess. And you'll get me. Once she's locked away in that facility in Savannah, we won't have to hide anymore." "Good," Jessica purred. She leaned up and kissed him. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was deep, passionate, and possessive. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears streaming down my face, soaking the carpet under my cheek. My heart shattered into a million pieces. The betrayal was so absolute, so physical, that I felt like I had been stabbed. They weren't just stealing my money. They were stealing my life. They were planning to erase me, to lock me away, and enjoy the fruits of my father's labor while I rotted in an institution. I wanted to burst out of the trunk. I wanted to scream, to scratch their eyes out, to kill them both. My muscles tensed, ready to kick the lid open. But then a soft tap echoed against the metal of the car. Tap. 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 It was Mr. Cobb. He was sitting in the driver's seat. He knew. He had known all along, or at least he had found out. He wasn't kidnapping me, he was saving me. He was showing me the truth, because he knew I would never have believed it otherwise. That tapping was a signal. Stay put. Stay quiet. The game isn't over. I forced myself to breathe. In, out, in, out. The rage that had flared up was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. If I revealed myself now, they would know I knew. They might hurt me physically, or worse, they might disappear me before anyone realized I was gone. We were in the middle of nowhere. No one would hear me scream. I watched through the crack as Dante pulled away from Jessica. "We should go. I need to get back to the church before anyone notices I'm gone. You take the papers. I'll sign them tonight when she's passed out." Don't worry, handsome, Jessica said, tucking the blue folder back into her bag. Go play the loving groom. I'll see you at the altar. Dante walked toward a black sedan parked a few yards away. Jessica got into her own car. I heard engines starting. Then the driver's door of my Rolls-Royce opened. Mr. Cobb slid into the seat. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He started the engine, and the car began to move, turning back toward the city. Lying in the dark, the tears on my face turned cold. The Jasmine who had entered this trunk, the hopeful, naive bride, was dead. She had died the moment she saw that blue folder. The woman lying in the dark now was something else entirely. I wasn't a victim. I was a CEO. I was my father's daughter, and I had a wedding to attend. They wanted a show. I would give them a show they would never forget. The moment the trunk popped open, the sudden flood of light was blinding. I scrambled out, gasping for air like a drowning woman breaking the surface of the water, and collapsed onto the manicured grass of a side road where Mr. Cobb had pulled over. My stomach lurched violently. I barely had time to lean forward before I was retching, purging the meager breakfast I had forced down hours ago along with the bile of betrayal. My beautiful Vera Wang dress, the silken lace that cost more than most cars, was dangerously close to being ruined, but at that moment I could not have cared less. I felt dirty. I felt contaminated by the lies I had been living in, by the man I had allowed into my bed and into my heart. Mr. Cobb was beside me in an instant, not as a servant, but as a guardian. He handed me a pristine white handkerchief, his hand trembling slightly. It was the only sign of how terrified he must have been to pull off this stunt. I wiped my mouth, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the cloth. I looked up at him, my eyes burning with tears and fury. I wanted to scream at him for locking me in there, for terrified me, but then I saw the look on his face. It was the same look he used to have when I scraped my knee as a child. Pure heartbroken concern. He spoke before I could get a word out. I am so sorry, Miss Jasmine. I am so sorry I had to do it that way. If I had just told you, you would have confronted him. You would have demanded answers, and he would have spun another web of lies. You are in love, and love is deaf. I needed you to see. I needed you to hear it from their own mouths. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black device. It was still recording. I realized then that the camera I saw in the car wasn't just a dash cam. Mr. Cobb had rigged the entire vehicle. Every word Dante and Jessica had said about the conservatorship, about the drugs, about locking me away in an institution was safe in this little black box. It was my salvation. I stood up using the side of the Rolls-Royce for support. The fresh air was clearing the fog in my head, the fog that I now knew was chemically induced. The sedative, the smoothies. It all made sense. The rage that washed over me was cold and sharpening. I looked at Mr. Cobb and nodded slowly. You did the right thing, Mr. Cobb. You saved my life. But now we have to finish this. He looked at me confused. We are going to the police station, right? Or the hospital? No, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. It was deeper, harder. If we go to the police now, it becomes a he said, she said mess. He has medical records saying I am unstable. He has a lawyer. He has his mother's church connections. If I cancel the wedding, he sues me for distress, and he uses those fake records to freeze my assets anyway. No. We are going back to the house, and I am going to walk down that aisle. Mr. Cobb's eyes widened, but he didn't argue. He opened the back door for me, the passenger door this time. As I slid onto the leather seat, I reached for my phone. My hands were steady now. The trembling had stopped, replaced by a singular, icy purpose. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It was the private line of Marcus Vance, my father's attorney, and the most ruthless shark in Atlanta real estate law. He answered on the second ring. Jasmine, is everything all right? You are supposed to be walking down the aisle in 2 hours. I skipped the pleasantries. Marcus listened to me very carefully because I do not have time to repeat myself. I need you to execute the emergency protocol on the family trust, the one my father set up for the doomsday scenario. There was a pause on the other end of the line, heavy with confusion. Jasmine, that protocol irrevocably transfers all liquid assets and property titles into a charitable holding company. It leaves you with technically nothing on paper. Why on earth would you want to do that on your wedding day? Because I am currently being targeted for a conservatorship fraud, I said, cutting him off. Dante and his sister-in-law have falsified medical records. They plan to have me declared incompetent by Monday morning. If I own nothing, they control nothing. I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by the sound of papers being shuffled aggressively. Marcus Vance didn't ask for proof. He knew me. He knew I didn't panic and I didn't hallucinate. His voice shifted instantly from concern to professional lethal mode. Consider it done. I can have the transfer timestamped for 8 this morning, retroactive to the start of the business day. You will be a pauper by the time you say I do. Good, I said, staring out the window as the familiar gates of my estate came into view. But I need one more thing, Marcus, and this is the most important part. I need you to draft a document. It needs to look exactly like the standard spousal asset management agreement, the one that gives him power of attorney. But I need you to swap the internal clauses. Go on, Marcus said, his tone sharpening with interest. Instead of a power of attorney, I want it to be an irrevocable debt assumption and indemnity agreement. I want a clause that states the signatory assumes full personal legal liability for all outstanding debts, liens, and judgments attached to the partner's name, known or unknown. Disguise it in the legal jargon. Make it look boring. Make it look standard. But make it ironclad. I could practically hear Marcus smiling through the phone. You want him to unknowingly sign a document that makes him personally responsible for your debts. Jasmine, you don't have any debts. Not yet, I replied, a cold smile touching my lips for the first time that day. But I am about to buy $3 million worth of his bad gambling loans from that loan shark in Atlantic City. I am using my personal savings to buy his debt. And when he signs that paper thinking he is stealing my fortune, he is going to be signing a confession that he owes me everything. I will meet you at the church with the papers, Marcus said. And Jasmine? Give him hell. I hung up the phone as the car pulled into the hidden service entrance of the estate. I had 30 minutes before the bridesmaids came to check on me. I slipped out of the car and rushed up the back stairs to my private suite, avoiding the chaotic hallway where florists and caterers were shouting instructions. I locked the bathroom door and leaned over the sink. I looked like a wreck. My mascara had run, creating dark, jagged streaks down my cheeks. My eyes were red and puffy. My skin was pale and clammy from the sickness. I looked exactly like what they wanted me to be, a broken, unstable woman on the verge of a breakdown. I turned on the cold water and splashed my face, scrubbing away the evidence of my tears. I grabbed the expensive foundation bottle and began to apply a new layer of armor, concealer under the eyes to hide the fear, blush on the cheeks to fake the glow of a happy bride, waterproof mascara layers of it to withstand the storm that was coming. I stared at my reflection in the gilded mirror. The woman looking back at me was terrifyingly calm. I thought about the little girl who used to sit in her father's office coloring and floor plans while he negotiated multi-million-dollar deals. He had taught me that in business, you never let the other side know they have hurt you. You smile, you shake their hand, and you wait for them to expose their neck. Dante thought he was marrying a fragile heiress who needed saving. He thought he was marrying a victim. As I applied the final coat of blood-red lipstick, I realized he was wrong. The Jasmine who had cried in the trunk, the Jasmine who wanted to be loved so desperately that she ignored the red flags, was dead. She had died in that dark, gasoline-smelling box. The woman in the mirror was not a bride. She was a CEO conducting a hostile takeover. I straightened my diamond necklace, the one my father gave me for my sweet 16, and whispered to the reflection, "Showtime." The air in the bridal suite was thick and suffocating, smelling of hairspray, expensive lilies, and the underlying scent of my own terror. I sat in the plush velvet chair, staring at the woman in the ornate gold mirror. She looked perfect. Her skin was flawless, her makeup hiding the redness of the eyes that had wept in a trunk just an hour ago. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, secured with diamond pins that cost more than my first car. But behind the eyes, I saw the cracks. I saw the rage burning like a cold blue flame. I had to dim that light. I had to look like the broken, medicated doll they wanted me to be. The heavy oak door creaked open, and Jessica slipped inside. She moved with the grace of a viper in silk. She was wearing her bridesmaid dress now, a soft lavender that made her look innocent, almost angelic. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her smile was plastered on bright and terrifyingly fake. In her hand she held a crystal tumbler filled with bright orange liquid. The condensation on the glass made it look refreshing, but I knew better. I knew it was a cocktail of vitamin C and enough sedatives to knock out a horse. "Jasmine, honey, you look so pale," Jessica cooed, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet southern charm. "You need to keep your blood sugar up. I brought you some fresh squeezed orange juice. It will help with the nerves." She held the glass out to me. Her eyes were fixed on mine, searching for any sign of resistance. If I refused, she would know something was wrong. If I drank it, I would lose the clarity I needed to destroy them. I reached out my hand, trembling slightly. That wasn't acting. My body was reacting to the proximity of the woman who was sleeping with my fiancé and plotting to steal my life. "Thank you, Jess," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I forced myself to sound weak, breathy. "I don't know what is wrong with me today. My head feels like it is floating." "That is just the excitement, sweetie," she said, pushing the glass into my hand. Her fingers brushed mine cold and dry. "Drink up. You will feel much better." I raised the glass to my lips. The smell of citrus hit my nose, masking a faint, bitter chemical undertone that I never would have noticed if I hadn't heard their conversation in the parking lot. I tilted the glass, letting the cold liquid fill my mouth, but I clamped my throat shut. I did not swallow a drop. I lowered the glass quickly, grabbing a thick linen napkin from the vanity table with my other hand. I brought the cloth to my lips, feigning a sudden wave of nausea. I coughed a wet hacking sound and spit the mouthful of juice into the folds of the napkin. I wiped my mouth aggressively, hiding the wet spot, and groaned, leaning my head back against the chair. "I am sorry," I gasped, keeping the napkin balled up in my fist. "My stomach. It is just knots." Jessica looked at the glass. It was still mostly full, but the level had gone down enough to make it look like I had taken a large swallow. She seemed satisfied. "That is okay. Just sip it slowly," she said, taking the glass from me and setting it on the table just out of my reach, but close enough to remind me who was in control. I looked at her, forcing my eyes to go wide and glassy. I needed to hook her. I needed to make her greed work for me, so she wouldn't look too closely at my behavior. "Jessica," I said, reaching out to grab her hand. She flinched, surprised by my touch, but didn't pull away. "I have been thinking about everything you have done for me. You and Dante. You are the only family I have left now that Dad is gone." Her eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. "We love you, Jasmine. That is what family does." I know I rambled, letting my words slur just a fraction, and I want to make sure you are taken care of. I was thinking, after the honeymoon, when I reorganize the board, I want to give you 5% of the company shares. Directly. Not through Dante. Just for you. The reaction was instantaneous. Her pupils dilated. Her breath hitched. 5% of my father's company was worth roughly $10 million. It was more than she would ever see from her 20% cut of Dante's scheme. I saw the greed wash over her face, erasing the caution, erasing the suspicion. She was doing the math in her head. $10 million of her own money, money she wouldn't have to hide from her husband or split with Dante. "Jasmine," she breathed, squeezing my hand back hard. You would do that for me." "You are my sister," I whispered. fighting the urge to vomit at the lie. I want us to build this empire together. She beamed. It was the first genuine smile I had seen on her face all day. It was the smile of a predator who had just been offered a bigger carcass. Oh, Jasmine, you are so generous. We are going to have the best life. Just relax now. Let the medicine, let the juice do its work. Before she could say more, the door to the suite was thrown open without a knock. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew heavier, colder. Lucille had arrived. Dante's mother marched into the room like a general inspecting the troops. She was a large woman imposing in a structured navy blue dress that cost more than my mortgage payments. She wore a hat with a wide brim that cast a shadow over her face, but nothing could hide the critical hawk-like gaze of her dark eyes. She didn't look at my face. She didn't ask how I was feeling. Her eyes went straight to my neck. She walked over to me, ignoring Jessica completely. Her hands, covered in rings that looked gaudy on her thick fingers, reached out and touched the diamond necklace resting on my collarbone. It was the centerpiece of the family collection, a piece my father had commissioned for my mother 30 years ago. "Is the clasp secure?" Lucille asked, her voice raspy and devoid of warmth. She tugged on the diamonds hard enough to scratch the back of my neck. "We cannot have this falling off during the ceremony. It is a family heirloom now. It belongs to Jasmine." Jessica corrected softly, but she stepped back, clearly afraid of the older woman. Lucille ignored her. She leaned in close to me. I could smell her breath, a mixture of strong peppermint and stale coffee. She stared at the diamonds with a hunger that rivaled Jessica's. In her mind, these diamonds were already hers. She was probably already planning which pawnshop to take them to, or which gala she would wear them to after they had me committed. "You look nervous, child," Lucille said, her eyes finally flicking up to meet mine. There was no kindness in them, only a steely warning. "I am just overwhelmed, Mrs. Brooks," I stammered, playing the part. She gripped my shoulders, her fingers dug into my flesh, painful and possessive. "Listen to me. Marriage is not about being overwhelmed. It is about duty. God has a plan for you, Jasmine, and that plan is obedience." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. "The good book says, 'Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord.' Do you understand what that means?" I nodded, my heart pounding against my ribs. "It means you stop asking questions," she hissed. "It means you stop trying to run things like a man. You let Dante lead. You let him handle the burdens of the world and the money. You are too fragile for business, Jasmine. Everyone sees it. Today is the day you surrender." It wasn't a prayer. It was a threat. It was a command to roll over and die so they could pick my bones clean. She was using her twisted version of faith to justify theft and abuse. I lowered my head, hiding the fire in my eyes. "Yes, Lucille," I whispered. "I understand." "Good," she said, straightening up and patting my cheek with a force that was borderline violent. "Fix your lipstick. You look washed out. We cannot have people thinking you are sick before you even say 'I do.' That comes later." She turned and marched toward the door, barking an order at Jessica. "Come, Jessica. Leave the girl to pray. We have guests to greet." Jessica gave me one last look, a look that was now a mix of pity and excitement for her $10 million, and followed her mother-in-law out. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the silence. I sat there for a moment, listening to the sound of my own breathing. I reached into my bodice and pulled out the linen napkin wet with the poisoned orange juice. I stared at the stain. They thought I was fragile. They thought I was broken. They thought I was ready to surrender. I stood up and walked to the mirror again. I looked at the woman staring back. She wasn't washed out. She was terrifying. "Submit to your husband," I whispered to my reflection, mimicking Lucille's raspy voice. I picked up the tube of blood-red lipstick. I applied a fresh coat sharp as a blade. "Not in this lifetime, Lucille. Not in this lifetime." The heavy oak doors of the sanctuary stood before me like the gates of judgment. Through the thick wood, I could hear the swelling chords of the pipe organ, a sound that was supposed to herald the beginning of a fairy tale, but now sounded more like a funeral dirge. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not with the flutter of a blushing bride, but with the steady, heavy thud of a soldier waiting for the signal to charge. I smoothed the silk of my dress with hands that I forced to be steady. This gown with its intricate lace and miles of tulle was no longer just a garment. It was a costume. I was about to walk onto the biggest stage of my life, and the role I had to play was that of the tragic, unstable heiress, crumbling under the weight of her own grief. The wedding coordinator, a frantic woman with a headset who had no idea she was orchestrating a crime scene, gave me a thumbs up. "It is time, Jasmine," she whispered, her eyes misty. "You look breathtaking. If only she knew." I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the thousands of white Casablanca lilies that decorated the foyer. My father loved lilies. He used to say they represented purity and rebirth. Today they just smelled like a cover-up. The music shifted, transitioning into the bridal march. The massive doors began to creak open slowly, revealing the cavernous expanse of the cathedral. The light hit me first. Hundreds of candles flickered along the aisle, joining the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows to create a golden, ethereal glow. And then the eyes. 500 faces turned toward me in unison. This was the creme de la creme of Atlanta society. Senators, business tycoons, real estate moguls, and the social climbers who desperately wanted to be them. They were all here to witness the union of the Brooks and Sterling families. But I knew what they were really seeing. They were looking for cracks. They had heard the whispers Lucille had planted. They were watching the poor, grieving orphan girl, waiting to see if she would snap. I stepped into the light. The aisle stretched out before me, a long, white runway leading to the man who planned to lock me in a cage. I kept my chin down, letting my veil obscure my eyes slightly. I needed them to see a shy, overwhelmed girl, not the predator I had become. I took the first few steps, moving slowly, almost hesitantly. My eyes scanned the front row, bypassing the blurred faces of distant cousins and business partners until they landed on a figure seated on the groom's side. It was Dr. Evans. My stomach clenched. He wasn't sitting with the guests. He was sitting on the edge of the pew, his body tense, his hand resting on a black medical bag at his feet. Dr. Evans had been our family physician for 20 years. He had given me lollipops when I got my vaccines. He had treated my father's hypertension, and now he was here as Dante's insurance policy. I saw him exchange a subtle nod with Lucille, who was seated across the aisle in a hat so large it looked like a weapon. The message was clear. If I deviated from the script, if I screamed, if I tried to run, Dr. Evans was ready to intervene. A quick injection for the hysterical bride, a sedative to calm her nerves. They would carry me out on a stretcher, and the narrative would be sealed forever. Jasmine Brooks had a psychotic break at the altar. Tragedy. I felt a surge of cold hatred so potent, it almost made me dizzy for real. But I used it. I channeled it. I needed to convince them that their plan was working perfectly. I took another step, and then I let my knee buckle. Just a fraction. It wasn't a fall, just a heavy, clumsy stumble, as if the ground had suddenly shifted beneath my feet. I threw a hand out, catching the edge of a pew to steady myself. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. 500 people held their breath. I saw heads lean in. I saw the pity in their eyes. Look at her, they were thinking. She can barely walk. She is medicated out of her mind. I looked up through my lashes straight at the altar. Dante took a half step forward, acting the part of the concerned groom, but he didn't come down the aisle to help me. He stayed put. And then I saw it. A smirk. It was microscopic, a tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He glanced at his mother. Lucille didn't look worried. She looked triumphant. She sat straighter in her seat, her chest puffing out slightly. To them, my stumble was the confirmation they had been waiting for. The drugs were in my system. The sedatives were peaking. I was pliable. I was weak. I was theirs. I righted myself, offering a shaky, apologetic smile to the crowd. I pressed a hand to my forehead, feigning dizziness before continuing the walk. Each step brought me closer to the trap and closer to springing it. The music swelled, filling the vaulted ceiling, drowning out the sound of my own shallow breathing. I walked past my father's empty seat in the front row. I had placed a single white rose there this morning. Seeing it now, a sharp pang of grief cut through my act. He should have been here to walk me down this aisle. He should have been here to intimidate Dante with a single look. But then I realized he was here. He was in the blood running through my veins. He was in the ironclad trust fund he had set up. He was in the ruthlessness I was about to unleash. I wasn't walking alone. I was walking with the weight of his legacy on my shoulders. Finally, I reached the stairs of the altar. Dante came down to meet me. He looked devastatingly handsome in his bespoke tuxedo, the very image of the perfect supportive partner. The light from the stained glass caught his hair, making him look like a prince. It was a terrifying disguise. He reached out and took my hand. His palm was warm, but his grip was possessive. He squeezed my fingers not in reassurance, but in warning. He pulled me up the final step, drawing me into his personal space. To the congregation, it looked like a tender moment between lovers. But up close, I could see the hardness in his eyes. I could smell the faint, stale scent of the cigarette smoke clinging to his collar, masked by expensive cologne. "You made it," he whispered, his voice low and smooth-pitched so only I could hear. He leaned in to kiss my cheek, his lips brushing against my ear. "You look beautiful, Jasmine. Don't worry about anything. Just hold it together for another hour. I am going to take care of you for the rest of your life." The threat was veiled in sweetness. I am going to take care of you meant I am going to control you. It meant locked doors and barred windows. It meant nurses and pills and silence. I pulled back slightly, just enough to look him in the eyes. I let my mouth curve into a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I made sure my expression was vacant enough to satisfy him, but hidden within it was a razor-sharp edge. "Thank you, Dante," I whispered back, my voice trembling with what he assumed was emotion. "I am so glad we are finally here. I have a surprise for you, too." His eyebrows twitched. "A surprise?" "Yes," I breathed, squeezing his hand back with a strength that surprised him. "A wedding gift. You are going to love it. It is exactly what you deserve." For a split second, a shadow of doubt crossed his face. He tried to read my expression, searching for the subtext, but I dropped my gaze, demurely playing the shy bride once more. He relaxed. He was too arrogant to believe I could outsmart him. He thought he had already won. He turned us toward the priest, his chest swelling with the pride of a man who thinks he has just pulled off the heist of the century. The priest began to speak, his voice booming about love, honor, and trust. I stood there, clutching my bouquet of white orchids, feeling the cold metal of the microphone pack Mr. Cobb had taped to my inner thigh earlier. I wasn't just a bride. I was a bomb waiting to detonate. And as the priest asked who gave this woman to be married, I stared at the crucifix hanging above the altar and prayed. Not for forgiveness, but for aim. I prayed that when I dropped the match I wouldn't miss. The walk of death was over. The execution was about to begin. The priest stepped back, gesturing for Dante to begin. The silence in the cathedral was absolute, a heavy, expectant blanket that smothered the air. Every eye was fixed on us. This was the moment the audience had been waiting for, the climax of the romantic tragedy Dante had so carefully scripted. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of stationery. His hands shook slightly. It was a perfect touch. A calculated display of nervousness that made the women in the pews sigh with adoration. He looked at me, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears that I knew he could summon on command. "Jasmine," he began, his voice cracking with emotion. "When I first met you, I saw a light that blinded me, but recently I have seen you carry a darkness that breaks my heart. I know the pain you are in. I know the confusion that clouds your beautiful mind since your father passed. I dug my fingernails into my palms. He was doing it. Right here in front of God and everyone, he was laying the foundation for my insanity plea. He wasn't vowing to love me. He was testifying to my instability. I vow. Dante continued, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a fierce, protective whisper that the microphone picked up perfectly, to be your anchor when you drift away. I vow to make the hard decisions when you cannot. I vow to protect you from the world and even from yourself, no matter the cost. I will take the burden of your legacy onto my shoulders so you never have to worry again. You are safe with me, Jasmine. I will never let you go. A ripple of sniffles moved through the congregation. I could hear my Aunt Clara blowing her nose loudly in the third row. They were eating it up. They saw a knight in shining armor promising to care for a broken damsel. They didn't hear what I heard. They didn't hear him saying, I will take your money. I will control your decisions. I will lock you up. Dante wiped a tear from his cheek and looked down at me with a gaze that was terrifyingly possessive. It was the look of a man who had just closed the deal of a lifetime. He lowered his paper, looking satisfied. My eyes drifted past him, drawn by a movement in the front row. Jessica was sitting there, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. But as she lowered the cloth, I saw it. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't joy. It was a smirk. A cold, tight smirk of victory. She caught my eye and didn't look away. In that split second, she wasn't just a bridesmaid. She was the co-conspirator claiming her prize. She looked at Dante, then back at me, her expression screaming, "He is mine, and your money is ours." The rage that had been simmering in my gut boiled over. It wasn't the hot, chaotic anger of the trunk anymore. It was cold. It was precise. It was diamond hard. Jasmine, the priest said, gently breaking the spell. Your vows. My hands were clutching the cue cards the wedding planner had written for me. Safe vows, standard vows. Jasmine, take you, Dante. Words that would seal my fate. I looked down at the cards. The ink blurred before my eyes. If I read these words, I was playing their game. If I read these words, I was the victim they wanted me to be. I looked up. I looked at Dante, who was watching me with a mixture of impatience and pity. He expected me to stumble. He expected me to cry and need his help to get through the sentences. I let go of the cards. They fluttered to the marble floor, landing with a soft hiss. Dante's eyes widened slightly. The priest looked confused. A murmur ran through the crowd. Was this the breakdown? Was the bride losing it? I took a step forward, closing the distance between Dante and me. I didn't look at the floor. I didn't look at the priest. I looked straight past Dante's shoulder, locking eyes with Jessica in the front row. Then I shifted my gaze to Dante, staring into the depths of his pupils until I saw the flicker of unease. I don't need cards to tell you what is in my heart, Dante, I said. My voice was clear. It was steady. It didn't tremble. It rang through the cathedral, bouncing off the stone walls with a power that surprised even me. Dante, you came into my life when I was vulnerable. You showed me a side of yourself that I never imagined existed. You taught me that things are not always what they appear to be. Dante smiled, thinking this was a compliment, but the smile faltered as I continued. Today, standing before God, I make you a vow. I vow that I will no longer be the woman who blindly trusts. I vow that I will pay close attention to every detail, every shadow, and every whisper. I paused, letting the silence stretch. The air in the room grew tense. This wasn't the script. And most importantly, I said, raising my voice slightly, ensuring that Jessica could hear every syllable, I vow to share my assets. I know how much my fortune means to you. I know it is the reason we are all here today. So I promise you this. I will share everything I have with the person who truly deserves it. I will ensure that every penny of my father's legacy goes exactly where it belongs. Dante's smile was gone. His brow furrowed. He was trying to process the words. Share assets. That sounded good. That sounded like what he wanted. But the tone was wrong. It was too sharp, too deliberate. I took a deep breath, delivering the final strike. The Bible says that the truth shall set you free, Dante, and it also says that God punishes those who bear false witness. So my final vow to you is this. May we both get exactly what we deserve before this day is over. May the truth come to light, and may justice be swift. I stopped. I didn't say I love you. I didn't say I take you. I just stood there breathing hard, my eyes drilling into his. For a moment, Dante looked like he had been slapped. He blinked rapidly, his mouth opening slightly as if to interrupt. He sensed the threat. He sensed the danger lurking beneath the surface of my words. He looked toward his mother, then toward Dr. Evans. He was calculating. Is she lucid? Is she threatening me? Or is this the rambling of a drugged mind obsessed with religion? He chose the latter. I saw the tension leave his shoulders. He decided that I was just being dramatic, that my talk of justice and punishment was just the religious guilt of a sick woman. He forced his smile back onto his face, though it looked strained now. He reached out and took my hands again, squeezing them hard enough to hurt. Beautiful, he whispered, though his eyes were cold. So passionate. The congregation, taking their cue from the groom, erupted into applause. They clapped for the raw emotion. They clapped for the intensity. They had no idea I had just declared war. I let him hold my hands. I let the applause wash over me. Enjoy it, Dante, I thought. Enjoy the applause. Because the next sound you hear will be the click of handcuffs. You think I vowed to give you my money. But I just vowed to give you a prison sentence. And unlike you, I always keep my promises. The reception hall at the St. Regis was a masterpiece of opulence, a gilded cage designed to dazzle the eyes and distract the mind. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a warm, flattering light over the hundreds of guests who were busy sipping Dom Perignon and devouring caviar canapés. To anyone else, this was the social event of the season, a triumphant merging of two beautiful families. To me, it was a shark tank, and I was the bleeding bait. I stood near a towering ice sculpture of a swan clutching a crystal flute of sparkling water as if it were a shield. I had refused the champagne 3 times already. I needed my mind razor sharp. I needed to see everything, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Lucille was working the room with the efficiency of a seasoned politician. She moved from table to table, her navy dress rustling softly, her hand resting affectionately on the arms of Atlanta's most powerful brokers and bankers. These were men and women who had respected my father, who had done business with him for decades. Now they were leaning in to listen to his daughter's mother-in-law, their faces twisting into expressions of performative concern. I watched her approach Mr. Henderson, the CEO of the bank that held the mortgage on 3 of my largest commercial properties. Lucille leaned in close, her voice low and conspiratorial. I could not hear the words from where I stood, but I could read the body language perfectly. She touched her temple, then gestured vaguely toward me, with a sad, resigned shake of her head. Mr. Henderson looked at me, his eyes widening in shock, then softening into pity. He nodded slowly, patting Lucille's hand as if to comfort her for the burden of dealing with me. She was planting the seeds. I knew the script she was using. She was telling them that the apple had not fallen far from the tree, but the tree she was referencing was a lie. She was whispering that my mother's death hadn't been an accident, but a result of a genetic mental instability. She was telling them that I was showing the same signs: paranoia, erratic behavior, forgetfulness. She was systematically dismantling my professional reputation before the first toast was even proposed. By Monday morning, when Dante filed for the conservatorship, none of these powerful people would object. They would nod and say they saw it coming. They would say they saw the madness in my eyes at the wedding reception. The isolation was suffocating. People who had known me since I was a child, people who had praised my business acumen just months ago, now avoided making eye contact. Those who did look at me offered tight, pitying smiles before quickly turning away. I felt like a ghost haunting my own party. I was surrounded by 500 people, yet I had never been more alone. I took a sip of water, the cold liquid grounding me. I scanned the room for Dante. He was at the bar laughing loudly with a group of his fraternity brothers. He looked triumphant. He had his arm around Jessica's husband, acting the part of the loving brother, while Jessica stood just a few feet away, her eyes locked on Dante with a hungry intensity that made my stomach churn. They were so confident. They thought the hard part was over. They thought the vows were the lock, and the reception was just the victory lap. A hand touched my elbow, startling me. I nearly dropped my glass, spinning around with my heart in my throat. Standing there was Reginald, a man I had known my entire life. He was one of the few real estate developers my father had truly trusted, a man of few words and immense integrity. Unlike the others, his expression wasn't one of pity. It was one of confusion and deep concern. Reginald the First breathed, trying to steady my voice. "I am so glad you could make it." He didn't return my smile. He stepped closer, creating a small private bubble amidst the noise of the jazz band. "Jasmine, we need to talk. Not here, but I cannot wait." "What is it?" I asked, sensing the urgency in his tone. He glanced over his shoulder at Dante, his eyes narrowing with distaste. "Your husband approached me 10 minutes ago. He was asking about the zoning laws for the Midtown Warehouse District, specifically the processing times for rapid liquidation sales." My grip on the glass tightened until my knuckles turned white. The Midtown District was the crown jewel of my father's portfolio. It was where we planned to build affordable housing and a new community center. It was a legacy project, not a profit engine. Liquidation. I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. Reginald nodded grimly. He asked if I knew any private equity firms that would be interested in a bulk purchase of commercial assets, strictly off-market, strictly cash. He said he wanted to simplify your portfolio to reduce your stress levels. The audacity was breathtaking. We hadn't even cut the cake yet, and Dante was already shopping my father's legacy to the highest bidder. He didn't just want to control the money. He wanted to cash out. He wanted to turn decades of hard work into a pile of money that he could blow on gambling and luxury cars, leaving my family's name in the dust. "He told me you were on board." Reginald continued, searching my face for the truth. "He said you were too overwhelmed to manage the complexities of development anymore, and that you wanted to retire to the countryside. Is that true, Jasmine? Are you selling the Midtown project?" I looked at this man, one of the few people in this room who actually cared about the bricks and mortar, about the community we built. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to tell him that Dante was a liar and a thief. But I couldn't. Not yet. The trap wasn't fully sprung. If I caused a scene now, Lucille would swoop in with her doctor, and Reginald would be just another witness to my breakdown. I forced myself to remain calm. I looked Reginald in the eye, channeling every ounce of strength my father had instilled in me. "Reginald, listen to me. I am not selling Midtown. I am not retiring. And I am certainly not overwhelmed." "But Dante said—" Reginald started, confused. "Dante is mistaken." I cut in, my voice icy. "He is under a lot of pressure today. Sometimes people hear what they want to hear. But I need you to trust me. Do not engage with him on any sales. Do not make any offers. And if he approaches you again, tell him you need to see the paperwork signed by me in person." Reginald studied me for a long moment. He saw the steel in my spine. He saw the clarity in my eyes that Lucille was trying so hard to deny. Slowly he nodded. "I hear you, Jasmine," he said quietly. "Your father always said you were the sharpest mind in the room. I am glad to see he was right. Watch your back, girl. There are sharks in the water." He squeezed my arm and melted back into the crowd, leaving me with a fresh wave of adrenaline. It wasn't just a conservatorship. It was a fire sale. They were going to burn everything down. I looked back across the room and saw Dante watching me. He raised his champagne glass in a mock salute, his smile dazzling and empty. He thought he was looking at a wife who was dutifully mingling. He had no idea he was looking at the executioner who had just sharpened her blade. He signaled for me to come over. It was time for the next phase, the private room, the insurance papers, the final signature. I took a deep breath, finished my water, and began to walk toward him. My steps were steady. My head was high. Let him think he is reeling me in. He doesn't know that I am the one holding the harpoon. The noise of the reception faded into a dull thrum as Dante guided me away from the ballroom. His grip on my upper arm was firm, guiding me with a force that looked supportive to onlookers, but felt like a shackle against my skin. We were heading toward the private bridal suite, a quiet sanctuary meant for touch-ups and moments of peace. But as the heavy door clicked shut behind us, the room felt more like an interrogation cell. The air inside was cool and still, a stark contrast to the humidity of the crowded dance floor. Before I could even turn around, I heard the distinct sound of the lock sliding into place. It was Jessica. She had slipped in behind us, her movements silent and predatory. She wasn't there to help me with my dress. She was the enforcer. Dante didn't waste time with pleasantries. The loving, attentive groom mask dropped the moment we were alone. He walked straight to the mahogany desk in the corner of the room, his movements sharp and agitated. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, folded document. He smoothed it out on the table, the paper making a crisp, dry sound that seemed to echo in the silence. "Jasmine, baby, come here," he said, but his voice lacked warmth. It was tight, hurried. "We need to get this done before we head back out. It is the insurance paperwork for the honeymoon." I stood frozen near the door, letting my shoulders slump. I needed to look small. I needed to look defeated. I blinked slowly, letting my eyes drift out of focus, channeling the lethargy that the sedatives were supposed to have induced. "Insurance," I asked, my voice thin and wavering. I thought we did that last week." Dante sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience that made my blood boil. "We did, but the travel agency messed up the dates for the Bora Bora transfer. We need to sign this updated policy before 5 o'clock, or we lose the deposit on the overwater bungalow. You know how much you wanted to stay there." He tapped the face of his watch. "It is 4:45, Jasmine. We are running out of time. Just come sign it so we can go back to the party." I took a slow, unsteady step toward the desk. Jessica moved immediately, stepping to my side. "Let me help you with your train, sweetie," she cooed, but her hands were rough as she adjusted the heavy silk of my skirt. She wasn't fixing it. She was boxing me in, ensuring I had a clear path to the desk and nowhere else. I reached the table and looked down at the document. It was thick, dense with legal jargon, the text small and cramped. The front page had a generic header about travel liability, a clumsy cover sheet they must have printed off the internet. But I knew what lay beneath. I knew that if I turned the page, I would find the clauses stripping me of my autonomy, granting Dante full power of attorney over my estate, my medical decisions, and my freedom. "My head hurts, Dante," I whispered, raising a hand to my temple. Can't we do this tomorrow?" The words are swimming. "No," Dante snapped, slamming his hand down on the table. "We cannot do it tomorrow. It has to be today. God. Jasmine, why do you have to make everything so difficult? Just sign the damn paper." He held out a heavy gold-plated pen. It was my father's pen. He must have taken it from the study. The sight of that pen in his traitorous hand almost made me break character. That pen had signed deeds that built communities. Now he wanted to use it to steal them. I reached for the pen, letting my hand tremble violently. I allowed my breathing to become shallow and rapid, the classic signs of a panic attack. Jessica made a sympathetic noise, but her eyes were cold, tracking my every move. "It is okay, Jasmine," she said, placing a hand on my back. "Just one signature, and then you can go lie down. We will take care of everything else." I took the pen. It felt cold and heavy. I leaned over the desk, supporting my weight on my left arm as if I could barely stand. I looked at the signature line. It was on the very last page, a separate sheet attached to the back. I need to sit down, I gasped. Just sign it, Dante hissed, shoving the paper closer to me. I moved the pen toward the line. My hand shook so hard that the tip of the pen danced above the paper. Then I let it happen. I let my fingers go limp. The heavy gold pen slipped from my grasp. It hit the edge of the desk with a loud clatter and rolled off, falling onto the thick carpet near Dante's feet. Oh no, I whimpered, clutching the edge of the desk. I am so clumsy. I am sorry. Dante let out a groan of pure frustration. He bent down, disappearing beneath the rim of the desk to retrieve the pen. Jessica, annoyed, bent down as well, trying to spot where it had rolled under the chair. This was it, the moment of blindness. In the span of a single heartbeat, my trembling stopped. My left hand, which had been resting on my beaded bridle clutch on the table, moved with the speed of a magician. I slid the clutch aside. Beneath it sat a single sheet of paper, folded once, the document Lawyer Vance had given me before the ceremony, the irrevocable debt assumption agreement. With a flick of my wrist, I grabbed the signature page of Dante's document and slid it under the blotter. In the same motion, I unfolded Vance's document and placed it exactly where the original had been. It was identical in font, paper weight, and layout. The only difference was the fine print above the signature line, fine print that Dante, in his arrogance and haste, would never read. I slumped back against the desk just as Dante popped back up, the pen in his hand. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the gamble. Here, he grunted, shoving the pen back into my hand. Hold on to it this time. I took the pen. I looked at the paper. I was staring at a death warrant, but not for me. This paper transferred $3 million of toxic debt directly to Dante Brooks. It made him personally liable for every financial misstep he had ever made, backed by assets he thought he was about to steal but would never touch. I looked up at him. His eyes were wide, expectant, greedy. He was looking at me like I was a golden goose waiting to be slaughtered. Okay, I whispered. For Bora Bora. For us, he corrected, a smirk playing on his lips. I pressed the nib to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly, black and permanent. Jasmine Sterling Brooks. I signed with a flourish, the letters looping and sharp. There, I said, setting the pen down. Is it done? Dante snatched the paper away before the ink was even dry. He stared at the signature, his eyes gleaming. He didn't read the text. He didn't check the clauses. He just saw my name, and he saw dollar signs. It is done, he said, his voice thick with triumph. He looked at Jessica. They shared a look that was so nakedly ambitious, it was almost obscene. A silent high five. They thought they had won. They thought the empire was theirs. Jessica let out a breath she must have been holding. Great, that is great. I will take this to the travel agent. I will make sure it gets faxed right away. She reached for the document, but Dante pulled it back, folding it carefully and tucking it into his inside jacket pocket, right next to his heart. No, I will handle it. This stays with me. I watched him pat the pocket. He was guarding his own destruction. I feel dizzy, I said, swaying slightly. Dante looked at me, and for the first time all day, his mask slipped completely. The concern vanished. The love vanished. There was only dismissal. You will be fine, he said, turning toward the mirror to check his tie. Pull yourself together, Jasmine. We have a cake to cut and you need to look happy. No more drama. Jessica smirked at me, a cruel, twisting expression. You heard your husband, Jasmine. Smile. You don't want to embarrass him now that everything is official. I looked from Dante's back to Jessica's face. They were already moving on. I was already an afterthought in their minds, an object to be managed until I could be discarded. I straightened my spine just a fraction. I took a deep breath, letting the dizziness fade. You are right, I said, my voice steadying. No more drama. I walked toward the door. Dante was too busy admiring himself in the mirror to notice that my step was no longer faltering. He didn't notice that the broken bride had vanished. As I reached for the handle, I looked back at them one last time. They were standing close together, whispering, probably planning how to spend my money. "Let's go cut the cake, Dante," I said. "I have a feeling this party is about to get very interesting." I opened the door and stepped back out into the noise of the reception. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the steel jaws to snap shut. The doors to the ballroom swung open, and the noise of the party hit me like a physical wave. The live band was playing a soulful rendition of a love song, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted lamb and expensive perfume. Dante walked beside me, his chest puffed out, radiating the arrogance of a man who believes he has just secured his fortune. He guided me toward the center of the room, where a massive multi-tiered wedding cake stood like a monument to excess. Beside it was a tower of champagne flutes, a fragile pyramid of crystal and gold liquid, waiting for the toast. I walked with my head high, but my senses were dialed up to 11. I knew the signing of the document wasn't the end. They needed a public spectacle. They needed the guests to see the breakdown with their own eyes, so that when the conservatorship papers were filed on Monday, no one would question why the vibrant Jasmine Sterling had been stripped of her rights. Jessica was trailing close behind us. I could hear the swish of her lavender silk dress. She wasn't just a bridesmaid. She was the shadow waiting to trip me up, literally and figuratively. As we approached the cake, the crowd parted their faces, a blur of smiles, and raised phones. They were ready to capture the perfect moment. Dante let go of my arm to grab the silver cake knife. In that split second of separation, I felt it. A sharp, violent tug on the back of my gown. Jessica had stepped on my train, driving her stiletto heel through the delicate lace and pinning me to the floor. The momentum was unstoppable. I was moving forward, but my dress was anchored. My feet flew out from under me. I didn't have time to scream. I grabbed for anything to steady myself, but my hands only found empty air. I pitched forward, crashing directly into the champagne tower. The sound was apocalyptic. Hundreds of crystal glasses shattered in unison, a deafening cacophony of breaking glass that silenced the band and the crowd instantly. I hit the floor hard, the cold, sticky champagne soaking through my dress immediately. Shards of glass bit into my palms and arms. The pain was sharp and immediate, but the humiliation was worse. I lay there in the wreckage, gasping for breath, looking up at the horrified faces of Atlanta's elite. For a heartbeat, there was total silence. Then the gasps started. I tried to push myself up, but my hands slipped on the wet floor, and I fell back down. Any normal husband would have been on his knees instantly. Any man who loved his wife would have been checking for blood, helping her stand, shielding her from the stairs. Dante did none of those things. He took a large theatrical step back, as if my clumsiness were a contagious disease. He looked down at me, his face twisting into a mask of exaggerated despair and frustration. "Jasmine," he shouted, his voice projecting to the back of the room. "Oh my God, not again! Why can you not control yourself?" He looked around at the crowd, spreading his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "I am so sorry, everyone. She has been having these episodes all week. The medication, it makes her lose her balance. It makes her confused." I stared up at him, my heart pounding. He was doing it. He was gaslighting me in front of 500 witnesses. He was turning an accident caused by his sister-in-law into a symptom of my insanity. I didn't... I stammered, playing into his hands. Jessica stepped on my dress. Dante shook his head, looking at me with pity that felt like a slap. "No one stepped on you, Jasmine. You just fell. You are hallucinating again. Just like you hallucinated the people in the garden yesterday. You are sick, honey. You are very, very sick." From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Dr. Evans was rushing toward us. He didn't look like a guest. He looked like a first responder arriving at a disaster zone. He was carrying his black medical bag, and he was moving with a terrifying purpose. "Clear the way," the doctor shouted, pushing past a stunned waiter. "She is having a seizure. I need space." I wasn't having a seizure. I was sitting in a puddle of champagne with a cut on my hand. But Dr. Evans dropped to his knees beside me, blocking my view of the crowd. He snapped his fingers in front of my face, shining a penlight into my eyes to blind me. Dilated pupils, erratic pulse, he announced loudly, reciting a diagnosis for a condition I didn't have. She is in a manic state. I need to sedate her before she hurts herself or someone else. He reached into his bag and pulled out a syringe. It was already prepped. The cap was off the needle, gleaming under the chandeliers. No, I whispered, scrambling backward on the wet floor. I don't need that. I am fine. Dante stepped forward, looming over me. Let him help you, Jasmine. Don't fight it. It is for your own good. We just want the voices to stop, right? He reached down to grab my shoulder to pin me in place for the doctor. The needle moved closer to my arm. The crowd watched in paralyzed horror, believing they were witnessing a tragedy, not a crime. I braced myself to kick, to scream, to fight for my life, but I didn't have to. A massive dark shape moved between me and the doctor. A hand thick and calloused from decades of driving a steering wheel clamped onto Dr. Evans's wrist. That is enough, a deep voice rumbled. It was Mr. Cobb. He stood like a stone wall, his uniform impeccable, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't twist the doctor's arm, he just held it with an immovable strength, freezing the needle inches from my skin. Mr. Cobb. I breathed, tears of relief finally spilling over. Nobody touches her, Mr. Cobb said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. She is not having a seizure. She was tripped. And she does not need your drugs. Dante's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. The mask of the grieving husband slipped, revealing the spoiled, arrogant bully beneath. He stepped up to Mr. Cobb, getting right in the older man's face. What do you think you are doing? Dante snarled, his voice dropping to a vicious hiss. Get your hands off the doctor. You are the driver, old man. You drive the car. You do not speak. I am speaking now, Mr. Cobb said, releasing the doctor's wrist with a shove that sent the man stumbling back. And I am telling you that this ends now. Dante laughed, a high, incredulous sound. It ends. You are right, it ends. You are fired. Do you hear me? You are fired. Get out of my wedding. Get off my property. I will have security throw you into the street. He turned to the security guard standing by the exit. Get him out of here, and hold her down so the doctor can do his job. The guards hesitated. They knew Mr. Cobb. They had worked with him for years. They looked from Dante to me, unsure of who was really in charge. I used that moment of hesitation. I grabbed the edge of the table and pulled myself up. My dress was heavy with champagne, stained and ruined. My hair was coming loose. I was bleeding. But as I stood there flanked by Mr. Cobb, I felt stronger than I had ever felt in my life. I looked at Dante, who was screaming orders like a tyrant. I looked at Jessica, who was hiding a smile behind her hand. I looked at the doctor, who was nervously recapping his needle. The performance was over. It was time for the reviews. I took a step forward, the glass crunching under my feet. No one is getting fired, Dante, I said, my voice cutting through his shouting. Because you can't fire staff from a house you don't own. Dante froze. The room went deadly silent. What did you say? He whispered. I said. I stood up straighter, ignoring the sting of the cuts on my hands. Mr. Cobb stays. The doctor leaves. And you? You might want to check your jacket pocket. I pointed to the pocket where he had stashed the document. The document he thought was his golden ticket. Because I think we need to read the fine print before we cut the cake. The doctor's hand was still hovering near my arm, the syringe gleaming under the chandeliers, like a silver fang waiting to strike. But the momentum had shifted. Mr. Cobb's massive hand on the doctor's wrist was the physical barrier, but the real wall was the one I was about to build. I looked at the needle, then up at the doctor's sweating face. He wasn't a healer. He was a hired gun in a white coat, and he was terrified because he realized the hit had failed. I reached out, not with the trembling hand of a victim, but with the steady iron grip of a woman who had signed multi-million-dollar contracts before breakfast. I pushed the doctor's arm away. It wasn't a violent shove, just a dismissal, a clear physical rejection of his authority and his diagnosis. "Get away from me," I said. My voice was low, but in the sudden vacuum of silence that had fallen over the ballroom, it carried like a gunshot. Dr. Evans scrambled back, nearly tripping over his own medical bag. He looked at Dante for instructions, but Dante was too busy staring at me. His mouth was slightly open, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He was running the calculations in his head. Why isn't she slurring? Why isn't she crying? Why isn't she asleep? The sedatives he had been slipping me for weeks should have made a fall like that catastrophic to my emotional state. He was expecting a puddle of tears. Instead, he got a statue of ice. I placed my hands on the wet floor, ignoring the shards of glass that bit into my palms. I didn't ask for help. I didn't look for a hand up. I engaged my core and pushed myself to my feet. My dress was heavy, the silk soaked with sticky champagne, the hem tattered where Jessica's heel had ripped it. I must have looked like a nightmare, blood on my hands, wine on my dress hair coming loose from its pins. But I felt cleaner than I had all day. The act was over. The groggy, pliable, confused Jasmine was gone. I stood to my full height. I rolled my shoulders back, a gesture my father used to make before he walked into a hostile boardroom. I wiped my bloody palms on the sides of my ruined dress, leaving long red streaks against the white silk. It was gruesome. It was perfect. Dante took a step toward me, his hands raised in a placating gesture, but his eyes were darting around the room, assessing the damage to his reputation. "Jasmine, baby, please," he said, his voice straining to maintain the facade of the concerned husband. "You are hurt. You are bleeding. Let's just go to the back. You are not yourself." I looked at him. I really looked at him. For the first time in 3 years, I saw him without the rose-colored glasses of love and grief. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the cheap ambition in his eyes. I saw a small, frightened man trying to steal a kingdom he wasn't strong enough to rule. "I am more myself right now than I have been in months, Dante," I said. I turned away from him. I turned away from Jessica, who was standing frozen by the cake, her face pale. She knew. She was the first one to realize that the game had changed. She saw the clarity in my eyes, and unlike Dante, she was smart enough to be afraid. I began to walk toward the stage where the band had stopped playing. The sound of my heels on the marble floor was rhythmic, deliberate. Click, click, click. Every step was a statement. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. 500 people, the elite of Atlanta, stared at me in stunned silence. I saw their faces, the judgment, the horror, the morbid curiosity. They thought they were watching a tragedy. They thought they were watching the final collapse of the Sterling dynasty. I reached the stage and climbed the stairs. My dress dragged behind me, heavy and ruined, a symbol of the life I was leaving behind. I walked to the center of the stage and grabbed the microphone from the stand. It gave a high-pitched squeal of feedback that made everyone flinch, but I didn't wince. I gripped the cold metal, feeling its weight. This was my weapon now. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw my father's business partners. I saw the people who had whispered about my sanity during the cocktail hour. I saw the friends who had abandoned me because Dante told them I was too sick to see visitors. "I apologize for the interruption," I said. My voice was amplified, booming through the massive hall. It was steady. It was commanded. It sounded nothing like the breathy, medicated whisper I had been using all day. "I apologize for the broken glass. And I apologize for the ruined cake. But most of all, I apologize for the lies you have been fed today." Dante was moving now. He was rushing toward the stage, signaling frantically to the security guards. "Cut the mic!" he hissed at the sound technician. "Cut the damn mic!" But Mr. Cobb had moved too. He was standing at the base of the stairs. His arms crossed, a silent sentinel blocking Dante's path. The security guards, confused and sensing the shift in power, stayed back. They weren't going to tackle the bride, not when she looked like this. My husband. I continued, pointing a bloody finger at Dante, who had stopped at the bottom of the stairs, trapped by Mr. Cobb's glare. My husband tells you that I am sick. He tells you that I am unstable, that I am hallucinating, that I need to be medicated for my own protection. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I let the audience look at Dante, then back at me. And you know what? He is right. A gasp went through the room. Dante's head snapped up, hope flaring in his eyes. He thought I was capitulating. He thought the drugs had finally kicked in and I was confessing. I am sick, I said, my voice dropping to a register of deadly calm. I am sick with a disease that has plagued women in my family for generations. It is called blind trust. I was sick with the delusion that the man standing before me loved me. I was sick with the hallucination that his family was my family. I was sick with the belief that I could buy loyalty with kindness. I took a breath. The silence in the room was so profound I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. But the cure for that sickness isn't in Dr. Evans' bag, I said, casting a withering look at the doctor who was trying to sneak out the side exit. The cure is the truth, Dante, I said, addressing him directly. You wanted everyone to see who I really am. You wanted a show. You wanted a breakdown. Well, I am giving you one. But it is not mine. I gestured to the massive projection screen behind me. It had been set up to show a montage of our romantic photos, a slideshow of our love story, set to sentimental music. It was currently blank, a giant white canvas waiting for paint. Before I go to the hospital, before I go to the institution you have picked out for me in Savannah, I want to give you and Jessica a wedding gift, a token of my appreciation for everything you have done to take care of me. I saw Jessica flinch. She took a step back, bumping into the table. She looked at the screen, then at me, her eyes widening in realization. She remembered the car. She remembered the privacy of the parking lot. But she couldn't believe it. Not here. Not now. Dante was shouting now, his voice cracking with desperation. Jasmine, stop. Don't do this. You are unwell. Everyone, please, she is having an episode. I ignored him. I looked up at the projection booth, where the AV technician was waiting. He was a young kid confused by the drama, but I had paid him $1,000 cash, 10 minutes before the ceremony, to play the file on the USB drive Mr. Cobb had given him, no matter what anyone else said. I raised my hand, a conductor signaling the orchestra. I invite you all to watch the screen, I said. Because the things we say in the dark have a funny way of coming to light. I lowered the microphone. I stepped back. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at Dante. I wanted to watch his face. I wanted to see the moment his soul left his body. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, plunging the audience into semi-darkness, leaving only the giant screen glowing like the eye of God. The static crackled and then the video began. The ballroom lights had dimmed, casting the 500 guests into a shadowed hush. They were expecting a montage of our first dates, perhaps a slideshow of childhood photos set to a swelling string orchestra. Instead, the massive screen behind me flickered to life with the stark, unedited grain of a high-definition dashboard camera. The angle was wide, capturing the desolate, weed-choked expanse of the industrial park where I had been trapped in the trunk just hours before. The timestamp in the corner of the screen read 8:45 a.m. For a moment, the room was confused. I saw people squinting, tilting their heads, trying to understand why the romantic retrospective was starting with footage of a rusted chain-link fence and a gray morning sky. Then the audio kicked in. It wasn't the soft melody of a love song. It was the sharp, distinctive sound of a car door slamming, followed by the crunch of gravel under expensive leather shoes. The speakers, usually reserved for toasts and music, amplified every breath, every rustle of fabric, broadcasting the intimacy of betrayal to every corner of the St. Regis ballroom. Dante's voice boomed through the hall, clear and undeniable. God, I need a smoke. My hands are shaking. On screen, Dante walked into the frame. He looked impatient, checking his watch, his face twisted in a sneer that the guests had never seen. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up in high definition. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The Dante they knew, the Dante who claimed to be a health-conscious saint, who hated smoking, was standing there inhaling nicotine like it was oxygen. Then Jessica entered the frame. She wasn't the demure bridesmaid dabbing her eyes in the front row. On screen, she was predatory. She leaned against the hood of the car, her body language loose and conspiratorial. "Did you bring the papers?" Her voice rang out shrill and demanding. "Right here," Dante replied on screen, patting his jacket pocket. "The conservatorship application. The moment the ring is on her finger, she is legally mine to control." I watched the audience. The confusion was shifting rapidly to horror. A woman at table 4 dropped her fork. It hit the china plate with a sharp clang that echoed like a gunshot in the silence, but no one looked at her. Their eyes were glued to the screen. "I want the penthouse," Dante. Jessica said, her voice dripping with greed. "You promised me the penthouse. I am sick of living in that townhouse with your brother. He is so boring." "You will get the penthouse," Dante assured her, stepping closer to her on screen. "Once I declare Jasmine incompetent, I can liquidate her assets within 30 days. I will sell the Midtown properties, dump the charity foundation, and we will have enough cash to disappear to Europe before anyone realizes the books are cooked." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating weight. The waiters had stopped serving. The bartenders had stopped pouring. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Dante stood at the bottom of the stage, his face illuminated by the ghostly light of his own crimes playing out behind him. He looked paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land, unable to form a single word of defense against his own voice. "What about Jasmine?" Jessica asked on the video. "What if she fights back?" Dante laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Fight back. Please. By the time the reception is over, she will be so drugged up on those sedatives Dr. Evans gave us, she won't even know her own name. And if she makes a scene, perfect. It just proves she is crazy. I will have her committed to that facility in the suburbs, the one with the high walls. She can scream all she wants in a padded room. No one will hear her." "And your brother?" Jessica asked. "What if Julian finds out Julian is an idiot?" Dante sneered. "He worships me. He will believe whatever I tell him. I will tell him Jasmine lost her mind and dragged the family down. He will probably thank me for handling the mess." The video cut to black. The lights in the ballroom did not come up immediately. For 10 agonizing seconds, the room sat in the darkness, digesting the bile of what they had just heard. Then the house lights flooded back on, blindingly bright, exposing every expression of shock and disgust. The silence broke. It didn't break with applause or laughter. It broke with the sound of a chair being shoved back so violently, it tipped over and crashed onto the floor. At the family table right in the center of the room, Julian stood up. Julian was Dante's younger brother, Jessica's husband. He was a quiet man, an architect who had always lived in Dante's shadow. He had always looked at his older brother with hero worship and at his wife with adoration. Now he stood trembling, his face drained of all color, looking like a man who had just watched his entire world disintegrate. He looked at the screen, which was now blank. Then he slowly turned his head to look at Jessica. Jessica was frozen near the cake table. She had nowhere to hide. The smirk was gone. Her face was a mask of sheer terror. She raised a hand toward her husband, her lips forming his name, but no sound came out. Julian didn't scream. He didn't attack. He did something far more devastating. He reached up to his left hand and pulled off his gold wedding band. He held it for a second, looking at it as if he didn't recognize it, as if it were a piece of trash he had found stuck to his skin. Then he threw it. The ring sailed through the air, glinting under the chandeliers, and hit Jessica square in the chest. It bounced off her silk dress and clattered onto the marble floor, rolling away into the silence. "You wanted the penthouse," Julian said. His voice was quiet, hoarse, but in the dead silence of the room, everyone heard him. "You wanted my brother." He turned to Dante. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was hatred. Pure, unadulterated loathing. I am the idiot. I am the one who worships you. Julian began to walk toward the exit. He didn't look back. He didn't stop when Dante called his name. He walked out of the ballroom, walking out of their lives, leaving a wake of destruction that no amount of money could fix. The spell broke. The room erupted. It wasn't polite murmuring anymore. It was chaos. People were standing up, shouting, pointing. My father's business partners were glaring at Dante with disgusted fury. The socialites who had whispered about me were now looking at Jessica with open contempt. I stood on the stage, the microphone still in my hand. I felt a strange sense of calm amidst the storm. I watched Dante spin around, trying to find a friendly face, trying to find an ally, but finding only a sea of enemies. He looked at his mother, Lucille. Lucille was sitting in her chair, clutching her chest. For once, she wasn't faking. Her face was gray. She realized that the church ladies, the charity board members, the high society matrons, they had all heard her son plotting to drug a woman and steal her fortune. Her reputation, the only thing she truly cared about, was incinerated. I raised the microphone to my lips one last time. The video has ended, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. But the consequences are just beginning. I looked down at Dante. He was staring up at me, his eyes wide with the realization of total defeat. He looked small. He looked pathetic. I hope you enjoyed the show, Dante, I said, because I have a feeling the encore is going to be a lot less entertaining for you. I pointed toward the back of the room. The double doors swung open again. This time, it wasn't a caterer. It wasn't a guest. It was 4 officers from the Atlanta Police Department, followed closely by 2 agents in FBI windbreakers. They weren't here for the cake. The chaos that erupted in the ballroom was absolute and deafening. The silence that had followed the video shattered into 1,000 pieces as Dante finally snapped. The realization of what had just been broadcast to the entire city of Atlanta hit him like a physical blow, stripping away the last remnants of his composure. He didn't look like a groom anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. He lunged toward me. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, veins bulging in his neck, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He scrambled up the stairs of the stage, ignoring the gasps of the crowd, intent on tearing the microphone from my hand. "It is a lie," he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "It is a fake. It is AI. Do you hear me? It is a deep fake. She made it up. She is tech-savvy. She is crazy. She created this to humiliate me." He reached for me, his fingers hooked into claws, but he never made contact. Mr. Cobb stepped forward, with the speed of a man half his age, placing a massive hand on Dante's chest and shoving him back. Dante stumbled, nearly falling down the stairs, but he caught himself on the railing. He spun around to face the audience, his arms waving frantically. "Do not believe her," he pleaded, looking from face to face, begging for an ally. "I love her. I have been trying to help her. That video is computer-generated. It is not real." From the floor below, Lucille joined the chorus. She had recovered from her shock enough to realize that her family's survival depended on denying everything. She stood up, knocking her chair over, and pointed a shaking finger at me. "You witch!" she screeched, her voice piercing the air. "You ungrateful, mentally ill witch! How dare you slander my son? How dare you create these lies on his wedding day? You belong in a straitjacket." The audacity was breathtaking. Even with their own voices echoing in the room, even with the visual evidence of their conspiracy playing out behind me, they were still trying to gaslight 500 people. They were doubling down on the lie because it was the only card they had left to play. I watched them with a cold detachment. I let Dante scream. I let Lucille wail. I waited until they ran out of breath. I waited until the crowd quieted down, eager to hear my response. Then I raised the piece of paper I had been holding in my left hand. It was the document Dante had signed in the bridal suite just 20 minutes ago. The ink was barely dry. "Is this a deepfake too, Dante?" I asked into the microphone. "Is this signature computer-generated, Or did you just sign this in the presence of your sister-in-law and myself? Dante froze. He stared at the paper. He recognized it. He thought it was his victory. He thought it was the power of attorney that gave him the keys to the kingdom. A smirk of confusion touched his lips. "That is my power of attorney," he shouted, trying to regain control. "That proves I am trying to take care of you. That proves you trust me to handle your affairs because you are incompetent." I shook my head slowly, a smile of pity touching my lips. "No, Dante. You really should have read the fine print. You were so eager to steal my money that you didn't even check the title of the document you were signing." I unfolded the paper completely, holding it up so the front row could see the bold black header. "This is not a power of attorney application," I announced, my voice ringing with authority. "This is an irrevocable unconditional debt assumption agreement." The room went silent again. The legal term hung in the air, heavy and confusing to some but terrifyingly clear to the bankers and lawyers in the room. I saw Mr. Henderson, the bank CEO, lean forward, his eyes widening behind his glasses. "Let me explain what that means for everyone who did not go to law school," I said, stepping closer to the edge of the stage, looking down at Dante. "It means that as of 20 minutes ago, you voluntarily assumed full legal responsibility for a specific portfolio of debt. You see, Dante, I know about Atlantic City." Dante's face drained of blood. It went past pale. It went translucent. The mention of Atlantic City hit him harder than the video had. "I know about the $3 million you owe to certain private lenders who do not operate within the banking system," I continued. "I know that you have been terrified for months. I know that you were stealing from me not just to get rich, but to stay alive. You were drowning and you thought I was your life raft." I took a step down the stairs, closing the distance between us. "So I did something generous. I bought your debt." Dante choked on air. "You?" "What I contacted your creditors this morning through my attorney," I explained calmly. "They were very happy to sell the debt to a legitimate business entity for 50 cents on the dollar. They wanted their money and they knew you didn't have it. But I did." I waved the paper in his face. "I own your debt now, Dante. I am your loan shark. But unlike the men you were dealing with, I prefer legal contracts. And this document, the one you signed so eagerly because you thought it was an insurance policy for a vacation you are never taking." I paused for effect. "This document states that you acknowledge the debt. It states that you agree to pay it back in full immediately. And most importantly, Clause 4 states that you pledge all of your current and future assets as collateral." I looked at him, letting the reality sink in. "That Mercedes you drove here, it is mine. The condo in Buckhead mine. Your watch mine. Even the tuxedo on your back is technically mine until you pay me $3 million. Dante staggered back. He looked like he was going to vomit. He looked at his hands as if checking to see if they were still there. He had walked into this room thinking he was about to become a multimillionaire. In the span of an hour, he had gone from a predator to prey. He was not just broke. He was in a hole so deep he would never see the sun again. Lucille collapsed into her chair, realizing that the golden goose was not just dead, but had been plucked, cooked, and served. There would be no penthouse. There would be no retirement in Europe. There was only debt. "But I didn't sign that," Dante screamed, his voice high and hysterical. "You tricked me. You switched the papers. This is fraud." "It is not fraud, Dante," I said coldly. "It is business. You signed it. There were witnesses. And you were of sound mind, weren't you? After all you have been telling everyone all day, how sane and capable you are, and how I am the crazy one. So which is it? Are you a sane man who signed a contract, or are you the incompetent one?" He opened his mouth but no words came out. He was trapped in his own web. If he claimed he was tricked, he had to admit he was trying to trick me. If he claimed he was incompetent, he lost his standing. "You have 24 hours to vacate my condo," I said, turning my back on him. "And Dante, leave the keys to the Mercedes on the desk. You will be taking the bus home." I walked back up the stairs to the stage, leaving him standing in the ruin of his life. The police officers at the back of the room began to move forward. They weren't coming for me. They were coming for the man who had just confessed to conspiracy and fraud on camera, and who was now legally destitute. The slap of the legal document hurt him more than any physical blow ever could. I had hit him where it mattered most. I had hit him in his wallet, and I had hit him in his ego. He was finished. And the beautiful part was he had done it to himself. He had signed his own name on the dotted line. The destruction of Dante was complete, but the demolition of the Sterling Brooks Union was far from over. The ballroom was buzzing with the frantic energy of a hive that had just been kicked over. Dante stood near the stage, a hollow shell of a man staring at the floor, as if waiting for it to swallow him whole. But my eyes shifted to the periphery of the chaos, to where the other players in this tragedy were trying to make themselves invisible. Jessica was standing near the ruins of the Champagne Tower, her lavender dress stained with the splashback of my earlier fall. She looked small now. The predatory gleam was gone, replaced by the frantic darting eyes of a rat trapped in a corner. She was watching the police officers, terrified that they were coming for her next. But the judgment coming for Jessica was far more personal than a pair of handcuffs. It came in the form of Julian, her husband, and Dante's younger brother. For years, Julian had been the background noise of the family. He was the quiet architect who nodded when Dante spoke and smiled when Jessica demanded more expensive gifts. He had been the perfect, pliable husband, blinded by love and loyalty. But the video had ripped the blindfold off with violent force. He had watched his wife conspire to destroy his sister-in-law. He had heard her mock him. He had heard her call him an idiot and a bore. Julian walked toward her. His movement was slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. The crowd, sensing a new wave of drama, parted to give him a path. Jessica saw him coming. She straightened up, wiping the fear from her face and replacing it with a mask of tearful innocence. She reached out her hands, palms up, in a gesture of pleading. "Julian, baby," she sobbed, her voice trembling with a performance that rivaled Dante's. "Please, you have to listen to me. That video was taken out of context. I was just agreeing with him because I was scared. You know I love you. I only wanted the penthouse for us." Julian stopped 2 feet in front of her. He didn't look at her tear-stained face. He didn't look at her reaching hands. He looked at the space between them, a chasm that had just opened up and swallowed their entire marriage. Jessica took a step forward, desperate to close the gap. "Baby, please, don't look at me like that. We can fix this. We can go home and talk." Julian finally raised his eyes. There was no anger in them. There was no fire. There was only a cold, dead emptiness that was far worse than rage. It was the look of a man looking at a stranger. He didn't speak. He didn't scream. He simply raised his left hand to his chest. With a slow, agonizing movement, he gripped the gold band on his ring finger. It was tight, a symbol of a commitment he had honored while she made a mockery of it. He twisted it, pulling it over the knuckle. Jessica watched the movement, her breath hitching in her throat. She shook her head frantically. "No, Julian, no. Don't do this." The ring came free. Julian held it between his thumb and forefinger. The gold caught the light of the chandeliers, gleaming one last time. He looked at the inscription inside, the date of their wedding, and then he looked at Jessica. He didn't hand it to her. He didn't place it on the table. He pulled his arm back and threw it. The ring hit Jessica square in the chest. It wasn't a hard physical blow, but the impact was seismic. It bounced off her silk bodice and clattered onto the marble floor, spinning noisily before coming to rest in a puddle of spilled champagne. The sound of the ring hitting the floor was the final period at the end of their marriage. Julian turned his back on her. He didn't wait for a reaction. He didn't wait for an explanation. He began to walk toward the exit, his shoulders slumped, but his stride purposeful. He was walking away from the woman he loved, walking away from his brother, and walking away from the toxic lie that had been his life. Jessica shattered. The reality of her situation hit her with the force of a freight train. The money was gone. The penthouse was gone, and now the safety net of her marriage was gone. Julian! She screamed, a raw, ugly sound that tore through the room. She lunged forward, scrambling over the broken glass in her heels. She ran after him, grabbing at the back of his jacket, her fingernails clawing at the fabric. "Don't you walk away from me! You can't leave me here!" she shrieked, hysterical. Julian didn't even break stride. He spun around, not to embrace her, but to dislodge her grip. He shrugged his shoulder violently, throwing her off. Jessica, unbalanced by her desperation, and her heels stumbled back. She flailed, trying to find her footing on the slick floor, but it was no use. She fell hard. She landed on her hip, sliding across the marble in a tangle of lavender silk and humiliation. It was a mirror image of my own fall earlier, but this time there was no sympathy. No one rushed to help her. The guests just watched, their faces masks of cold judgment. Jessica lay there, sobbing into the floor, calling a name that was no longer hers to speak. I watched from the stage, feeling a grim sense of closure. Jessica had wanted to be the queen of the castle. Now she was just a woman alone on a dirty floor. But there was one more head of the Hydra that needed to be severed. Lucille. The matriarch of the Brooks family was trying to make a stealthy exit. While everyone watched Jessica's meltdown, Lucille had grabbed her purse and was inching toward the side service door. She kept her head down, using the brim of her hat to shield her face, hoping to slip into the shadows before the spotlight found her. She almost made it. Her hand was reaching for the brass handle of the door when a figure stepped out from the alcove, blocking her path. It was Marcus Vance, my attorney. And he wasn't alone. 2 uniformed police officers flanked him, their expressions grim and unyielding. "Mrs. Brooks," Vance said. His voice was smooth, professional, and loud enough to carry over Jessica's sobbing. "Going somewhere?" Lucille froze. She slowly turned around, her face a mask of indignation. "Get out of my way, Marcus. I am leaving. My son has destroyed this wedding, and I will not stay here to be gawked at. I am going to the church to pray for his soul." "I don't think you will be going to the church today," Lucille Vance said, stepping closer. "In fact, I don't think you will be going to the church for a very long time." "What are you talking about?" Lucille spat, clutching her pearls. "Move aside." Vance reached into his briefcase and pulled out a file. It wasn't a thin envelope. It was a thick dossier, red-flagged and stamped with official seals. "We have been auditing the books," Lucille Vance said, holding the file up for the room to see. "Specifically the books of the St. Jude's Restoration Fund and the Orphans Mission Fund. You know, the charities you have been treasuring for the last 10 years. The color drained from Lucille's face so fast she looked like a corpse. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "We found the transfer." Vance continued, his voice relentless. $300,000 moved from the church building fund to a private offshore account in your name and then funneled directly to Dante's creditors last month. A collective gasp went up from the room. These people were her congregation. They were the people who sat in the pews with her every Sunday. They were the people who had donated that money. "You stole from the church?" A woman in the front row whispered, her hand covering her mouth in horror. "Lucille." Lucille looked around wildly. The judgment pressing in on her was suffocating. She had built her entire identity on being a pillar of morality, a woman of God. Now she was exposed as a common thief who stole from orphans to pay for her son's gambling habits. "It is a lie," Lucille croaked, her voice trembling. "Satan is testing me. This is a test of faith." "It is a felony," Mrs. Brooks, one of the officers said, stepping forward and unhooking the handcuffs from his belt. "We have a warrant for your arrest for embezzlement and wire fraud. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Lucille looked at the handcuffs. She looked at the faces of her friends who were now looking at her with disgust. She realized there was no speech she could make, no scripture she could quote to talk her way out of this. So she played her final card, the card of the frail, elderly victim. Her eyes rolled back in her head. She let out a soft, theatrical moan. "Oh, my heart," she whispered. She collapsed. It was a controlled fall, much more graceful than Jessica's. She crumpled slowly, making sure to land on her side rather than hitting her head. She lay on the carpet, her eyes fluttered shut, waiting for the rush of concern, waiting for the ambulance that would whisk her away from the police and into the safety of a hospital bed. But no one moved. I stood on the stage and watched the performance. I saw the way she had braced herself with her elbow as she went down. I saw the way her eyelids fluttered, checking to see if anyone was buying it. Lawyer Vance didn't even blink. He looked down at the woman lying on the floor and sighed. "Officer," he said calmly, "please assist Mrs. Brooks. And if she is unconscious, I suggest you call the paramedics to meet you at the precinct. She can be arraigned from a stretcher if necessary." The officer nodded and reached down, grabbing Lucille's arm firmly. "Ma'am, get up," he said, his voice void of sympathy. "We know you are awake." Lucille's eyes snapped open. She realized the game was up. The humiliation was total. She wasn't a martyr. She was just a criminal lying on a dirty floor. I lowered the microphone. The stage was empty. The actors had all played their parts. The groom was bankrupt. The mistress was abandoned. The matriarch was arrested. And I was the only one left standing. The punishment was complete. It was time to leave the theater. The officers moved with a heavy, practiced synchronicity that signaled the end of the show. They did not rush. They did not shout. They simply marched toward the stage, parting the sea of stunned guests like a dark blue tide. Dante watched them come, his eyes darting frantically from the exit signs to the grim faces of the men closing in on him. For a fleeting second, I saw his muscles tense, the instinct of a coward urging him to run, to bolt through the kitchen doors and disappear into the night. But he was surrounded, not just by law enforcement, but by the wall of judgment he had built for himself. The socialites, the bankers, the tycoons he had spent years trying to impress, they were now the bars of his cage. Dante Brooks, the lead detective, announced, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, grand larceny, and assault with a controlled substance." The words hit Dante like physical blows. Conspiracy, larceny, assault. The charges stripped away the veneer of the respectable businessman he had pretended to be, revealing the desperate criminal beneath. He staggered back, his heels catching on the steps of the stage. "Assault," he stammered, his voice high and thin. "I never touched her. You have no proof." "We have the toxicology report from the sample Miss Sterling provided this morning," the detective replied, unhooking a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "And we have your voice on tape admitting to sedating her against her will. That is poisoning, Mr. Brooks. And in the state of Georgia, that is a felony that carries a very long sentence. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No," Dante screamed. The denial broke through his shock, ugly and raw. "This is a mistake. She is lying. She set me up." He pointed a shaking finger at me, his face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. "You did this. You crazy witch. You ruined everything. I was going to save this family. I was going to make us rich." The officers didn't have time for his tantrums. They grabbed his arms, spinning him around with professional force. Dante struggled, thrashing against their grip, kicking out like a petulant child. The tuxedo jacket, the one he had probably charged to my credit card, strained at the seams. "Stop resisting!" the officer barked, forcing Dante's wrists together. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest melody I had heard all day. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a steel door slamming shut on his future. It was the sound of my freedom. They hauled him up, dragging him off the stage. Dante was not going to walk out with dignity. He was fighting every step, shouting profanities that made the church ladies cover their ears. As they marched him down the aisle, the same aisle he had walked down an hour ago as a triumphant groom, the crowd reacted. These were people who prided themselves on decorum, on maintaining appearances. But the revulsion in the room was palpable. I saw former business partners turning their backs on him. I saw women pulling their skirts away as he passed, as if his failure was contagious. Hundreds of phones were raised recording his walk of shame. He had wanted to be the talk of the town. He had wanted fame. Now he was going to be the most viral moment in Atlanta history, but for all the wrong reasons. He locked eyes with people as he passed, pleading with them. Henderson. Tell them who I am. Mr. Henderson. The banker simply took a sip of his champagne and looked away, staring at the wall as if Dante didn't exist. The rejection broke him. Dante realized he wasn't just going to jail, he was being erased. He was being exiled from the world he so desperately craved. His pleading turned to venom. He craned his neck back to look at me, his eyes bulging. You will regret this, Jasmine, he roared, spit flying from his lips. You are nothing without me. You are a weak, lonely little girl. You will rot in that big house alone. The officers shoved him forward, forcing him toward the double doors. But I wasn't done. I needed him to hear one last thing. I needed to close the loop. I walked down the stairs of the stage. I didn't run. I moved with the slow, terrifying grace of a predator who has already made the kill. The crowd parted for me again, falling silent as I approached the group of officers near the exit. Wait, I said softly. The detective paused, looking at me with respect. He signaled his men to hold Dante for a second. Dante was panting, his hair disheveled, sweat pouring down his face. He looked at me, expecting me to slap him or maybe to cry. He still thought he had some emotional hold on me. I leaned in close. I moved into his personal space, close enough to smell the fear and the stale cigarette smoke on him. I brought my lips to his ear, whispering so only he could hear. It was an intimate distance, the kind usually reserved for lovers, but my words were a blade. You tried to put me in the dark, Dante, I whispered. You tried to lock me away where no one could hear me. I pulled back just enough to look into his terrified eyes. Tell me, do you like the trunk? Because where you are going, the cells are very small and the walls are very thick. I hope the prison van is spacious enough for your ego. Dante's eyes widened. The memory of the trunk of the trap he thought was so clever came rushing back. He realized that the trunk hadn't been my coffin. It had been my cocoon. It was where the victim died and the survivor was born. Get him out of here, I said to the detective, straightening up and stepping back. Dante opened his mouth to scream again, but the officers were already moving. They pushed him through the doors, out into the flashing lights of the police cruisers waiting in the driveway. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, cutting off his voice, sealing him out of the St. Regis, out of society, and out of my life forever. The ballroom was quiet. The show was over. The villain was gone. I stood there for a moment looking at the closed doors. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I felt light. It was the weightlessness of a survivor who has finally put down the heavy burden of survival. I was empty, but it was a clean emptiness. A space ready to be filled with something true. I turned around and looked at the room one last time. The spilled champagne, the broken glass, the shocked faces. It was a disaster. It was a mess. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I didn't owe them explanations. I simply turned and walked toward the side exit, leaving the wreckage of the wedding behind me. I stepped out into the cool evening air of Atlanta. The humidity had broken, leaving behind a crisp, clean breeze that smelled of jasmine and wet pavement. The city lights were flickering on in the distance, a sprawling galaxy of amber and gold against the twilight sky. The noise of the reception was muffled now, a distant hum that felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. I looked down at myself. My wedding dress, a custom creation that had taken 6 months to sew, was ruined. The hem was black with dirt and stained with wine. The bodice was stiff with dried champagne. It felt heavy, like I was wearing a suit of armor that had served its purpose, but was now just a burden. I reached down and grabbed the thick layers of tulle and silk at my thigh. The fabric was durable, meant to withstand a night of dancing, not a night of war. But I pulled. I put all my frustration, all my anger, all the years of trying to be the perfect polished doll into my hands. The fabric shrieked as it tore. I ripped the heavy train away from the skirt, tearing through the delicate lace and the expensive lining. I stripped away the excess, the weight, the expectations. I threw the bundle of ruined silk onto the pavement. It looked like a dead animal, a shed skin. Then I looked at my shoes, the towering satin heels that had been blistering my feet for hours. The shoes that made me taller, made me walk a certain way, made me totter so Dante could steady me. I kicked them off. First the left, then the right. They skittered across the concrete landing in the gutter. I stood barefoot on the cool ground. The texture of the pavement was rough against my soles, grounding me, connecting me to the earth in a way I hadn't felt in years. I wiggled my toes. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that tasted solely of my own freedom. A sleek black car idled quietly at the curb a few yards away. It wasn't the Rolls-Royce. It was my father's old vintage Lincoln, a car he loved, because it was built like a tank and drove like a cloud. Mr. Cobb was standing by the open rear door. He wasn't wearing his chauffeur's cap. He was holding it in his hands, his gray hair catching the light of the street lamps. He looked at me, barefoot, disheveled, standing amidst the ruins of my wedding dress. He didn't look scandalized. He didn't look worried. He smiled. It was a genuine, proud smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You did good, Miss Jasmine," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did real good." I walked over to him, feeling the grit of the road under my feet. I didn't get into the car immediately. I stopped in front of him and took his rough, calloused hands in mine. "I didn't do it alone, Mr. Cobb," I said. "You saved me. You are the only family I have left." Mr. Cobb shook his head. "No, Miss Jasmine. You saved yourself. I just drove the car." "But your father, if he were here tonight, he wouldn't just be proud. He would be bowing down. You have his fire, Jasmine. You always did. You just forgot where you put it for a while." I felt a tear slip down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. I squeezed his hands. "Take me home, Mr. Cobb. Not the estate. Take me to the Midtown property. I want to see the skyline from the roof." "Yes, ma'am," he said, ushering me into the back seat. I slid onto the familiar leather. It smelled of old tobacco and peppermint, the scent of my father. Mr. Cobb closed the door, shutting out the world. The lock clicked down. This time it wasn't a cage, it was a fortress. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the St. Regis and the wreckage of the Sterling Brooks wedding in the rearview mirror, I didn't look back. I rolled down the window, letting the wind whip through my hair, tearing away the last of the pins and hairspray. I watched the city of Atlanta pass by. The skyscrapers were tall and unyielding monuments to ambition and strength. I saw my reflection in the glass. I looked wild. I looked messy. I looked exhausted. But for the first time in my life, I recognized the woman staring back at me. She wasn't an heiress. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't a bride. She was Jasmine, just Jasmine. I touched the empty spot on my finger where the engagement ring used to be. I had left it on the podium. It felt lighter. My whole life felt lighter. I had lost a husband, a mother-in-law, and a sister-in-law in the span of 3 hours. I had lost millions in potential reputation damage. I had lost the fantasy of a perfect life. But I had found my voice. I had found my spine. And I had protected the one thing that actually mattered, the legacy entrusted to me. The car merged onto the highway, speeding up, moving toward the future. The road ahead was dark, but I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I had lived in the trunk. I knew what the darkness held. And I knew I could survive it. Sometimes God puts you in the trunk not to bury you, but to hide you while the wolves reveal themselves. Sometimes you have to be forced into the small, dark places to realize just how big your light really is. They thought the trunk was my end. They didn't know it was my womb. I was born in that trunk. And the woman who climbed out, she is unstoppable. I closed my eyes and let the wind carry me home. The nightmare was over, the morning was coming, and this time I was driving. The most profound lesson I learned is that sometimes life forces us into the dark, not to bury us, but to plant us. Being trapped in that trunk stripped away my illusions, forcing me to confront the painful reality of betrayal I had chosen to ignore. It taught me that my worth is not defined by who loves me, but by how I fight for myself. We often fear the truth because it hurts, but the truth is the only thing that can liberate us from the cages built by others. My end was actually my beginning. If you've ever had to find strength in your darkest moment, please like this video, subscribe for more stories of resilience, and share your own journey of overcoming betrayal in the comments below.